This is the Power Break Podcast number 036, titled Recognized for Faithfulness. Hi, I'm Bob Brubaker along with JT as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. Big Bad Bob. What's going on, buddy?
Big Bad Bob, huh? Well, I don't feel so big and bad anymore. But I do try to work out every day.
Hey, man, you look fantastic.
Oh, well, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Are you working out? You look like it.
I am working out. Yeah, I've actually managed to lose a couple pounds lately too.
Well, Howard would be proud of you.
Well, Howard yelled at me, so I hope he's proud of me when I go back.
Well, we'd like to take a moment just to reintroduce ourselves for those who are new listeners, because we're getting new listeners all the time. I'm Bob Brubaker, who I'm the pastor of Christ Community Presbyterian Church here in Clearwater, Florida. I've been in ministry since 1983, which means that's when I was first ordained. Man, am I old. I'm also a 19-time Ironman triathlon finisher, an avid cyclist, one of the athletes still, although I'm 66 with a lung condition and 2 knee replacements.
Yeah, man, they put Humpty Dumpty back together again for sure when it came to you.
How about you, JT?
Well, I'm JT. My actual name is John Tribino, and the only person actually in my life that calls me JT is either Bob or Bob's friends. So. But it's perfect. I am a law enforcement officer, have been for coming up on 22 years with the Largo Police Department here in Largo, Florida. And that is not Key Largo, people. I wish. Largo's very different.
The middle of Pinellas County, which is the little finger that sticks down into Tampa Bay.
It is not an island, for sure.
Right.
I am a deacon at Skycrest Community Church, and I play guitar in their worship team. And I am also an athlete, but the most important thing is I am a dad with 2 very active boys and a wife who is fantastic named Amy. So,
wow,
that is me. That is who I is.
Okay. Well, tell you what, we're the Power Break Podcast, and we're a twice weekly show featuring this question and answer discussion format and Good Times with JT and me, along with our interview program where I interview interesting guests about their stories of perseverance.
Yeah, which, when you started that series, man, I didn't honestly know how it was going to go. And man, truth be told, I listen to that more than you and I's podcast.
Hey,
sorry, man.
Hey,
well, I mean, it's kind of. I already know the ending of ours. It's kind of like watching Titanic over and over again. You know how it's going to end.
We're going down the tubes after. There you go.
No, because I read the script. I had to read the script. Come on, man.
Okay.
But yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about is subscribing and telling your friends about the podcast. We certainly appreciate it. And we certainly have noticed all the new listeners. And I've noticed some people sending questions into the email. So that's pretty awesome too.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And not having it be like your wife asking me over for dinner.
Now, let's understand that, just so that people understand that that asking you over for dinner was for JT,
for all
Amy,
of us.
Christian, and Gabriel.
Come on, man. People know us better than that.
Okay.
Come on. Yeah, and also I would urge people to go to bobbrubaker.com and subscribe to your Power Break blog. And that can come to them if they sign up for it. It comes every Monday, and that's something I also look forward to. And usually it coincides with what we're talking about on the Power Break. So it's a good 1-2 punch, as I like to call it.
1, 2. Well, as we say, we all have this to help you succeed in the race of life.
Yeah. So thanks for spreading the word. We really appreciate it.
All right, JT, as we begin this, talking about faithfulness today, name someone in your life who has demonstrated or is demonstrating faithfulness that you looked up to.
Oh, man, there's a bunch of them, honestly, that have just done some incredible things. I would put you in that category, honestly.
Thanks.
I would put Amy in that category for sure, because my wife is just, man, she tolerates me. That's faithfulness.
We both married.
Beyond all comprehension.
We both married up.
We did, for sure, which means they married down, so we got to always feel bad.
Oh, man.
But, you know, I remember my grandmother. She was the same way. She was just a machine, man. Her faithfulness was always right on point.
Right on. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
How about you? I'm sure, I hope as a pastor, you've met a ton of people.
Yeah, and I'd begin with my father. My father, you're talking about faithfulness. My father worked at a little machine shop he co-opted when he was in high school. He went back there and worked at the machine shop, and then he only time that he ever took off from the machine shop, this little machine shop in Akron, Ohio, was when he went to the war and served our country in the war. And he came back and worked faithfully in that machine shop until he retired.
So awesome.
You're talking about faithfulness. And my parents were only members of one church. They were just faithful members. It was just things like that you just don't see today.
No, everybody is... it's kind of if you find something in it you don't like, instead of sticking it out, we have a tendency just to go someplace else, don't we?
You sure do. Well, the point is, faithfulness is an attribute to which we all should aspire, and is a quality which draws the attention of God, as we'll look at here, and rightly so, because our faithfulness in life is actually a reflection of His faithfulness, which means there is recognition of faithfulness.
Wow. Pretty awesome. You know, I think we should talk a little bit more about that as we turn to what's new. In our section on what's new, we go to Bob's blog that I already talked about a little bit. Like I said earlier, you can go to bobbrubaker.com and you can download that. But, of course, the title of that blog that we're going to talk about is Recognized for Faithfulness.
Recognized for faithfulness. We would all like to be recognized for something. Some would like to be known for their talent, others for their successes, and maybe others for the number of friends they get on, or likes they get on Facebook. Okay, but there is one area where anyone can be recognized, no matter what level of skill, talent, or opportunities they have. Though very few achieve this recognition. Here's what it says in the book of Proverbs, chapter 20 and verse 6. Many a man proclaims his own steadfast love, but a faithful man who can find?
Who can find?
Who can find? Notice what the Scripture is saying here, that faithfulness is quite an admirable trait, because it is really so hard to find. It doesn't take a great deal of skill to be a faithful husband, a church member, or employee, but it does take focus and discipline. We're reminded by the Lord Jesus Christ that everything we have in life is really His, so we're to be good stewards of all that He has placed in our lives. Remember the parable of the talents and the words of the faith to the faithful stewards in Matthew 25? Well done, thou you good and what?
Faithful
servant. Yep. Jesus taught that being faithful to Him is actually in a way to increase your faith in Luke chapter 17. And no wonder then we're reminded of what God expects in our service, and our attending to all that He has entrusted us to be is faithful, as He says in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 2. Moreover, it is required of stewards to be faithful.
Yeah, you know, I in my walk, and certainly with my membership at my church and my being involved in it as a deacon and leading a small group there, you know, you go through phases of times where it's not so good, for lack of a better way to put it. It's tough. Yeah. You gotta stick your nose down. You know, there had been a lot of turnover in staff at my church at one point, during my attendance there. And, you know, a lot of my friends moved away and stuff like that. So, but the bottom line really was something my friend Dean used to always say. He's like, you know something? He said, God called me here. So who am I to question why? Mm-hmm. It's really my job just to come here and push that rock and be faithful.
That's right. That's right. Well, speaking of that, there's a man who is really faithful in the Old Testament. Now, it never uses the word faithful, but you know, his name actually implies that. His name is Caleb.
Oh.
Remember that portion in Joshua 14 when he talks about the fact that, you know, he was 40 years old when Moses sent him to Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land with Joshua and then the 10 other spies.
Yes. Yeah.
The 10 other spies gave a bad report. Joshua and Caleb gave the good report. And now here he is, 85, and he's ready to take the land.
Right.
He says to Joshua, I'm ready. I'm strong today as I was the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is in my strength as it was then for war and going and coming. So now give me that hill to which the Lord spoke of, that it was mine that day, because He wants to fight the Anakims, which is, of course, it was a fortified city of giants.
Right.
which was what the people of Israel were scared about, the 10 spies that said it's a bad land. You know, there are giants in the land, there are walled cities, and now Caleb says, I want this because God has promised me because I've been faithful. Right. And so he says, now I'm strong as ever. I want to take that fortified city where the giants live.
Wow. So does the name Caleb mean faithful?
It implies that, yeah.
Oh, nice.
It actually means one who is faithful like a dog. And I hate to use that because then it makes people whose name is Caleb.
We only think of that as derogatory now. I'm sure back then it wasn't thought of faithful, as derogatory at all. Yeah, faithful. It's faithful.
Yeah, faithful. Yeah. Anyway, you can check out the blog. It's at BobBrubaker.com. And the whole point about it is that we want to point out that faithfulness is a great quality, and it does take discipline. It does take focus, and anyone can be faithful. Well, check it out, BobBrubaker.com. Check out the Power Break blog. And as JT says, be sure to subscribe.
That's right. Subscribe. So what else is going on, Bob? Anything new?
Well, I wanted to point out the fact that we just published, and I just happen to have a copy today of the newly published book called Finding Delight in the Lord's Day. And on the cover, you'll see a cup of coffee and a cinnamon roll.
I got to tell you, the cover looks delicious. I walked in here hungry, and I got more hungry looking at that cover.
Actually, my wife took the picture. It's pretty good, and she came up with that idea. Now, she worked at an advertising agency one time, but you would think that she has all that talent. She's creative. Anyway, the reason is because I like to make Sunday special, and Jan and I like to have our Kona coffee on Sundays. We reserve that because it's so expensive to have it make Sunday a very special day. And growing up, my mother would always make cinnamon rolls on Sunday. And so that was part of my pointing out in this book that Finding Delight in the Lord's Day is you make it a special day for you and your family.
Yeah.
It is a special day that God has designed for us to take a day of rest, a day of worship, a day to refocus, a day of replenishing, if you please. And in the Old Testament, it was like God had provided an oasis in the desert. And when we think about the week goes on, it's like the desert of life. But when you get to the Lord's Day, Sunday, it's a special day.
It is, for sure.
It's a place of refreshment. Anyway, you'll find the link on my website, BobBrubaker.com. Click through the books, and the new book is called Finding Delight in the Lord's Day. It will take you to a place where you can order that book. Check it out.
All right, so here we go. It's time for What About This, which is our time for questions and answers on the podcast. Feel free to submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering those very soon in an upcoming podcast. You ready for question number 1, Bob?
Let's talk about it.
All right. So you talked about faithfulness in the Power Break blog. So how does a person work on being faithful spiritually, or what is the spiritual connection to faithfulness?
Well, like Jesus pointed out on that parable of the talents, when he pointed out the faithful one, actually the one who had received 5 talents and went out and earned 5 more, and the other had received 2 and went out and earned 2 more. He says, well done, now good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a little, and I'll give you, make you ruler over much. And so that's exactly what the Lord Jesus Christ is looking for us, to be faithful even in the little that we have. We have to look at it as being good stewards, as anything that God has provided. That would be our talent, our time, our not just our money, but also our opportunities that we have in life.
Right.
And we're to be good stewards, as it says that it's required of a steward that they be found faithful. But how about this? How about you faithful in your word, if you give your word for something? You know, there was a time, believe it or not, people could get a loan at the bank just by their word.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's what James says. Above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other, but let your yes be yes and your no, no. And of course, Jesus even says, and the one who is faithful in a little is faithful also in much, in Luke chapter 16. But sometimes people have even neglected the vows that they've taken. Sometimes I have to remind people, especially when I do premarital counseling, that they've taken a vow, or we have new members make a vow to the church, or our officers make a vow. And so when we come to that, always remind people that when you make a vow to God, as it says in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 4, do not delay in paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow.
Yeah. Great story. My grandfather, when he actually purchased his land, it wasn't really a purchase. This was a long time ago. He got brought down from New Hampshire, originally where his family was from, to open up Foxborough Raceway, which was a harness racing track, so horse racing, but with the buggies behind the sulkies, they call them. Yeah, the trotters and the pacers, exactly. So he got brought down from there to actually start that, and he said, well, I don't have any place to live. And the guy who owned all the property said, listen, if you come down here and run this thing for me, you can just have the property up there, and you can build a house, do whatever you want. Handshake. 3 people witnessed the actual transaction.
Wow.
Yeah. So fast forward, and this isn't me judging anybody, but the bad part of the story is we don't honor that anymore.
No.
So what ended up happening when Bob Kraft bought the Patriots and then they closed down the raceway to build the brand new stadium?
They tore down the house.
They said, hey, listen, there's nobody alive here that witnessed that handshake.
Oh, isn't that
It's no longer valid. Yeah.
Wow.
But we have gotten to the point now to where your word doesn't have to mean everything, which I think is so sad.
It's sad.
Yeah. And I was sitting with some friends. You and I were talking a little bit earlier. I was sitting with some friends last night, and we were just talking about that. How there's and I'm sure everybody has that in their life when they go to work. They're like, man, I don't even know if I can trust that person, and I work with them. I don't really know if what they're telling me is the truth or if it's just because they have an angle or whatever. And it's so sad. I mean, let your yes mean yes, and let your no mean no, and I don't swear by the Lord on any of it.
Yeah, and if you do make a vow, be sure to make a vow and pay it.
Yeah,
and be faithful. I think the point comes back to this: being faithful in the little things. Even the little things in life, you realize this before God, and so being faithful in the little things mounts up to be the big things too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that to me is the best predictor of whether you'll be faithful. And I think the Lord says that's the best predictor of whether you'll be faithful is whether you'll do it in the little things. You'll surely do it in the big things.
Amen, JT.
Amen.
Let's look at the next question. What do you have?
All right. So where do we begin on a journey of developing faithfulness from the mental standpoint?
No, that's exactly what we were talking about. You begin with the little things. It says he who was faithful in the little will also be faithful in much. He who was dishonest in a very little things will be dishonest in much. Little things like, how's this? Being faithful to be on time.
What? Yeah. That doesn't happen anymore.
Well, I understand. We all have those times when we're not. But, you've seen people that just habitually are late.
Oh, yeah.
And they count on being late.
Yeah.
And that's the way they live. And so their word is not any good. If they agree to a time and they're not faithful to the word. It says in Proverbs chapter 25, verse 19, confidence in an unfaithful man in a time of trouble is like a broken tooth or a foot out of joint.
Oof. Yeah. How descriptive is that?
Yeah. So stop and think about it. If you've made a commitment to your job, to your church, to your wife, to anyone, and then you don't show up or show up late, it's just like them taking a real nice big old bite of JT's steak and expecting that flavor just to melt in their mouth. And what do they get? A broken tooth. Oh, no.
Yeah, a nice, sharp, nasty pain instead.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what the writer of Proverbs says, that's exactly how a person feels when they've been jilted by somebody who is unfaithful to their word or in their actions.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't show up, that's exactly what you've caused from another person to feel. Anyway, good idea to think about that. And, so being faithful in the little things, being on time, being faithful to your word, and then let it stretch and grow through life, and being faithful, whatever you have committed to do, just do it.
Yeah, just do it. That's right. Yeah. That's right. We're going to turn to the physical aspect here in a minute. and we're going to talk a little bit about the Tour de France guys.
All right.
Which, of course, talk about faithfulness. If they weren't faithful to themselves and to their exercise and to their training, then they wouldn't be in the Tour de France. And that's another thing. That's actually what I really wanted to talk about with the physical stuff is, we're given a body and we are expected to be faithful with how we treat it.
Well,
aren't we?
being good steward, yes.
Yeah.
Everything that God places in our hand to take care of, He holds us accountable that we are to be good stewards.
Yeah. So if we're not taking care of ourselves and because of that we can't follow through with some of the stuff that He has planned for us, then we're not being good stewards, right?
I had a minister friend years ago that was severely overweight, and he said he needed to lose weight, and he lost over 100 pounds.
Wow.
Because
How awesome is
of that.
Really?
He said, because of my weight, I cannot serve God properly. Now, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody about their weight, but I'm just saying this is what my friend said.
Yeah.
He was very convicted about it. He said, I've let this go too long.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, he made a turn, and he never turned back, if you please. He never went back to gaining the weight, as some people do. Speaking of the Tour de France and being faithful, there's a team on the Tour de France, Movistar, and they were not faithful to their number one guy.
What?
Yeah.
When did this happen?
It happened on Sunday's stage that actually the team started to drive the pace to move up the mountain.
Yeah.
And they dropped him.
Oh, no, they dropped their number one guy.
It was obvious that there's been a little fighting and feuding in the team. And Nairo Quintana is his name. And
I know Nairo, yeah.
And he's normally a very good cyclist, but he was having a rough day. And the Movistar team was up at the front pushing the pace. And next thing you know, where is he? He's dropped back, and so a couple of riders went back after him and to help him get up. But wow.
They couldn't bring him back to the front.
They couldn't bring him back. No.
Wow.
Anyway, that's from the mental standpoint. The mental standpoint is when you think about being faithful, be faithful in everything.
And I have to make a confession about at work. I was having a conversation last night, and the truth is that I didn't even realize that I had become unfaithful in some of the things that I had said I would be faithful to at work. And that's the best part about having friends that will hold you accountable is they'll say, "Hey, listen, dude, not for nothing, but you've been kind of slipping on this. What's going on?" And oh man, they're right. I literally hadn't even noticed it because I was so focused on other stuff. Mm-hmm. So having that accountability is sometimes the only way that whether you've slipped off the faithful wagon, for a better way to put it.
It says in the book of Proverbs that faithful are the wounds of a friend.
Wow. How cool is that?
Yeah. Exactly what we're talking about.
So cool. So did you want to talk a little bit about hydration? I think that's also really important.
Yeah, sometimes we lose sight of it, especially here in Florida. We forget the fact that we need to be hydrated because the weather is so hot. Of course, it's been hot everywhere in the country lately. But
it's been brutal.
Yeah. But sometimes people notice how many water bottles they think they know the water bottles of the Tour de France guys. They use about 2 to 3 to 4 water bottles an hour, which means they go through a lot of them. And hydration is very important for them, as it is in any event. I remember the doctor at the Ironman Triathlon World Championship in Hawaii. They always had a pre-race meeting, that you would have to go to, and each of the organizers, the captains of each of the stations of the swim, the bike, and the run, and the transition areas would all talk about what you do in those areas. And then the medical doctor would get up, the medical supervisor, and he would say this: if you don't have a plan to eat and drink during the race, you won't. And if you don't, you will see me early. And you don't want to see me early because that means we're taking you off the course and taking you to the hospital. So, in other words, you have a plan to eat and to drink, and that goes for on a daily basis. That goes for any kind of exercise that you do. That you have a plan to eat and drink for hydration and nutrition. And if you don't have a plan, then you go into that what is it called? Decision fatigue, where you don't think. You know, and those guys it's driven to them so many times. Of course, all the guys in the Tour de France have that earpiece where the director of the team is speaking to them constantly and reminding them if they don't drink that they will be off the course. They won't last through the day.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you were absolutely, the couple of times that we went over 100 miles together, I mean, that was something you just had to make sure that you were on a schedule. And if you weren't on a schedule, you were not going to make it.
Yeah.
And we've both been on rides where, you know, people had to jump in the car because they couldn't keep going.
That's right.
You know, and inevitably you look at them and they're just covered in salt, but they weren't drinking. You know, and it's like, man.
So easy to neglect hydration and nutrition. There's a good spiritual application there, too, that we neglect the Word of God and prayer so much in our lives because we keep going in life. But that's going back to the spiritual. We're on the physical here. But the reminder from the physical is the fact that you need to hydrate and have a plan and carry it out.
Yep.
Well, check out today's show notes at bobbrubaker.com and click on the Power Break podcast. Today's show is number 036.
And submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com and listen for Bob's answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Let me step in here and just talk a little bit about God's Power Line of Prayer. That's a little book that I wrote about God's given us such grace to be participant with Him in what He's accomplishing in the world. I call this God's sovereign plan includes our participation through prayer.
Yeah.
And what an important part of our lives. Anyway, I would like to send that book to you. Please check it out on my website and click on the books and go through those books and you'll look at God's Power Line of Prayer. Order one today. And because we can all improve in that area of life, but especially when we get the encouragement that God uses our prayers to carry out His sovereign plan in the world.
Yeah. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us on the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast, and check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at bobbrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break podcast.